Hello friends, I'm Das Food, and today we're going to finish my series detailing where every character in Dead by Daylight is from. If you missed it, we already covered where the survivors are from in another video, so make sure you check that one out when you're done with this one. But just like last time, we have a lot of information to get through, and I don't want to keep you here all day. So sit back, get comfy, and let's do a rundown on where each of DBD's killers comes from. One quick note before we get going, I would like to clear up some errors from the first video, namely the origins of Michaela Reed. There is nothing in her lore that says anything about where she's from, and due to a lack of further evidence, I just sided with the DBD wiki and said she's American. In hindsight, this was a mistake because it's just as possible with a surname like Reed that she's from Canada, Ireland, or the UK. One other correction is that I said I wasn't sure where exactly Thalita and Renato are from in Brazil, but some viewers in the know informed me that they're from Rio de Janeiro, so thank you, I appreciate that. Those minor miscues aside, let's move directly into the main video, and again we're going to start with the country that's given us the most characters, that being the United States of America. Now, last time, whenever I introduced a country, I would give some warm, fuzzy kinda, here's what I like about this country. We're not going to do that for the ones that are popping up on this list again, so if you want to hear what I have to say about some countries, you're going to have to go back and watch the other one again. But out of the game's 31 current killers, 13 of them call the United States home. Sadly, the lore is considerably less specific for most killers than it was for the survivors, that is, so the guesswork here was more rampant this time through. We know that Sally Smithson, the nurse, is from America, but there's no way of knowing which state she comes from. I tried figuring out where Crotisprin Asylum is, but that search came up empty. And Sally's ethnicity is English, which is extremely common in the US and doesn't make any one area more likely than the rest. As opposed to areas like Minnesota having a high concentration of Scandinavians, Texas having a lot of Germans, Southern Cal being a hotspot for Asian immigration, and so on and so forth. No, Nurse is as vaguely American as a character is going to get, I'm afraid, and there's just not a lot we can say about that. The same goes for my personal favorite character, Kenneth Chase, aka the Clown. We again know that Chase is American, but neither his base lore nor his tome lore shine any light on where exactly he's from. For what it's worth, Clown is very obviously based off the real-life serial killer John Wayne Gacy. I mean, they're both heavy-set killer clowns who use chloroform to incapacitate their victims, and Gacy was from Chicago, Illinois. So if your headcanon needs a specific place for Clown to call home, I think the Windy City will do just fine. Since I just mentioned a real-life serial killer, let's go on and talk about the DBD killer that is most based on the true crime genre, that being Danny Johnson, the Ghostface Killer. Once again, we don't have a specific location for Danny's origin. I told you, this happens a lot with the killers, but we know that at different times in his life, he operated out of Utah, Pennsylvania, and Florida, with the Sunshine State being his last location before being taken by the entity. As a big fan of flags, I just want to say, way to go, Utah. Your new flag looks fantastic, and I might have to buy a copy of that bad boy, because that is just lovely. Now, I don't know what the weather is like in the fog, but I do guarantee you it's less humid than Florida, so Danny, he who hunts in a rubber suit all day, is probably excited by his change of scenery. We'll keep in the American South and talk about Lisa Sherwood, the Hag. While we can't know exactly where she's from, that again, it's a trend, Hag seems to be from a bayou or swamp of some kind. While swamps are kind of all over the US, bayous are mostly specific to 3 states, those being Arkansas, Louisiana, and you guessed it, the best state of them all, Mississippi. On top of that, Lisa is African American, and out of all 50 states, Mississippi and Louisiana have the highest concentration of African Americans, lending more credence to the fact that she might be from this area. And let me say, as a loud and proud Hag hater, if the day comes where the devs confirm that she is a Magnolia State native like yours truly, I will ditch the Clown in a heartbeat and play nothing but Hag. That behavior is not a prediction, it's a spoiler, and I beg you to seal the deal now. Or, you could just make the Clown from Mississippi. That would also work, and that would be neat too. Next up, we have yet another killer who is only generally American, that being Herman Carter, aka the Doctor. In his original lore, it was said that he went to Yale, indicating that he possibly lived in the Northeast or the Rust Belt, but that's been retconned, and now we have absolutely no idea where he's from. He does work closely with the CIA, which is based out of Langley, Virginia, but I highly doubt that they put their most infamous black sites just a stone's throw away from their headquarters. Sorry friends, there's just really no telling where the doc is from. That said, if you are from the US, just say he's from your state. Who can prove you wrong? Go for it. I'm encouraging you. Do it. We also don't know where Albert Wesker, the mastermind, or Amanda Young, the pig, are from. Going off the criteria from the Survivor Origins video, I'm content to list Amanda as being from New Jersey until we receive evidence to the contrary, but I can't be as confident with Wesker. Yes, we know he lives in Raccoon City at a certain point in his life, but just listen to him. Wesker doesn't speak with the same accent as anybody else in the Resi universe, and while he's undoubtedly American, his accent is too comically evil to be associated with a real location. If nothing else, he sounds infinitely more like a Connecticut or Vermont blue blood than he does a Midwesterner, but that's just my personal take. Speaking of the Midwest, we've once again reached the part of the video where I dump all of the Midwestern and Rust Belt characters into one part. We'll start off with Caleb Quinn, better known as the Death Slinger, who lived in Nebraska. This isn't actually mentioned in Slinger's lore, but Zarina's lore says she went to Nebraska to see the Hellshire Penitentiary, so that's good enough for me. Notably, Quinn also comes from strong Irish descent, surprisingly making him the game's only Irish character to this point. I mentioned in the last video that Quentin Smith is from the fictional town of Springwood, Ohio, and the same can be said for the Nightmare Freddy Krueger. Krueger, obviously of Germanic ancestry, seemingly lived his entire life in Springwood, working as the groundskeeper for Battle Elementary until a mob led by Eugene Krabs, no, really, burned him alive. Unlike most people, Krueger took his dedication to his hometown a step further by not only spending his entire life there, but also remaining there after death, haunting the descendants of those who disregarded the law and delivered him a harsh serving of mob justice. In another case of a killer being from the same town as the survivor they released with, the Shape is from Haddonfield, Illinois, just like Laurie Strode. Before becoming the literal embodiment of evil and the ultimate boogeyman, the Shape was just a young boy named Michael Audrey Myers. Yeah, his middle name is Audrey. And he enjoyed a very healthy upbringing, assuming we're going off the original or current continuity and not the Rob Zombie version, that is. Zombie just made him the Clown, which was a bold choice. Heading out west, we find Evan McMillan, the Trapper, who it might surprise you to learn is from Seattle, Washington. For my money, Trapper's vibes are far more West Virginia, but I'm not in charge of writing character backstories, and behavior chose to make Evan be from the Evergreen State. Now, to be fair, Trapper would actually fit in rather well in eastern or even central Washington, but oddly enough, they chose Seattle, which has been a pretty metropolitan area for a long time. Thankfully, this origin gives you an out the next time Trapper catches you, as he's sure to let you go if you strike up a conversation about local craft beer or Seahawks football. Only 2 more killers left to go in the states, and both of them are from the Lone Star State. Probably. Leatherface, whose real name is Bubba Sawyer or Thomas Hewitt, depending on the timeline we're in, is definitely from Texas. And while the films like to play around with which town he's from, the actual Sawyer house is in Kingsland, which is northwest of Austin. Hillbilly, who tragically has no real name, is probably also from Texas. He was clearly inspired by Leatherface, and the trees on his map are said to be cedar elms, which mostly grow in Texas. They're also native to Oklahoma as well though, so if behavior wants to differentiate the two, they could always say that Billy is from the Sooner State, which I would actually like. I think that'd be cool. For our next most killer-rich country, we head far east to beautiful Japan, which has given Dead by Daylight 3 killers. 2 of these killers not only call the same country home, but the very same house, though they lived there at vastly different times. Rin and Kazan Yamaoka, the spirit and the Oni, respectively, are from an ancestral home in the Kagawa prefecture. Kazan lived there in the mid to late 1800s, and sadly, he couldn't quite send a fax in time to save his good friend Abraham Lincoln from certain doom. Rin grew up during the modern era, which for our purposes will serve to mean sometime from the 1990s to the 2010s. It's a little more flexible there. Either way, she doesn't know what a fax machine is. There is, of course, a third Japanese killer, that being Sadako Yamamura, known in the entity's realm as the Onryo. In my previous video, I couldn't quite place where the first Ringu film took place, but further digging has revealed the film to be set on Oshima Island, a volcanic island in the Itsu archipelago. Not only is Oshima a very real place, but it's also very beautiful, and looking at pictures of it just kind of makes me feel, I guess, serene and peaceful. What a lovely area. Next up, we have the United Kingdom, which provides the game with two killers. First to release was Talbot Grimes, who you may know as the Blight. Grimes is from beautiful, bold Scotland, a place of skyscraping mountains, lush glens, welcoming shores, and most famously, gorgeous and free highlands. The ancestral home of the Gaels, Scotland gave the world golf, tires, Presbyterianism, penicillin, and perhaps most importantly, my favorite instrument, the bagpipes. Scotland is a one-of-a-kind place, and I really hope to visit it one day. Blight, of course, didn't have to visit, as Scotland was his home, though we don't know exactly where he was born. The same goes for Elliot Spencer, aka Pinhead, who was also from the UK, being born an Englishman. Obviously, this means the Blight and Pinhead would be best friends, because if there's one thing history has taught me about the Brits and the Scots, it's that they really like each other. What? What's that? Bannockburn? Flodden? You're just making up words now. But yeah, Spencer served in the British military and fought in World War I, losing his faith and will to live in the process. This eventually led him to seek out the Lament configuration, which in turn led him to call Hell itself his home. The damn English, they're even colonizing Hell now. From here on out, we've reached the section where every country is a bit of a one-off, save for a segment I'm saving for the end, so in no particular order, let's talk about the countries with only a single killer. As I did before, I want to give Behavior credit for their self-control when it comes to Canadian characters. It would be tempting to release one Canadian character after another, seeing as though that's where the devs are from. But the game's been out for 7 years and we have yet to see killers like the Mountie, the Goalie, or the guy who must aggressively insist that his culture is nothing like that of the US. In fact, Canada only has one killer, or 4 depending on how you slice it up. That's right, everyone's favorite HU tribute act, the Legion, made up of Frank, Julie, Joey, and Susie, are all Canadian. At least 3 of them are Albertans, but we don't know if Frank was born in the fictional town of Ormond or not. There is a new comic coming out for the Legion, so maybe we'll know more about their origins soon. Keeping it in the Americas, we head way down south to a country that invested all of his experience points into length and none of them into width. A country where the local dialect is so fast that Eminem's rap god seemed a little slow to them when they first heard it, and where they're definitely tired of you confusing their flag for Texas's. That's right, we're going to Chile, a country so beautiful that instead of using words, I'm just gonna do a slideshow to prove my point. Oh, that's nice. Just lovely. Gorgeous. You're absolutely gorgeous. Lovely Chile is the home of one Carmina Mora, the artist. Behavior doesn't give us an exact town to link her to, but they do tell us that she's from southern Chile in the Patagonia region. Which, my goodness, how could you live in such a place and not want to be an artist of some kind? Gosh, I have got to move on before I make this whole thing just some kind of video slideshow about Chile. Of course, not far from Chile, and arguably just as beautiful, is Brazil. And look, I hyped up Brazil's natural beauty last video, so this time I'm going to mix it up and focus on these big boys. This right here is an Orinoco crocodile, and now look, I know, it's beautiful and it's awe-inspiring, but it's also critically endangered. People hunt and kill these majestic beasts for their hides, and if I can be frank, people who do this irredeemably suck, and it is my sincerest hope that they suffer every minor inconvenience life can throw their way, and maybe even a couple of major ones. And if they ever just so happen to find themselves being eaten by an Orinoco crocodile, oh well. But anyway, Brazil, yeah, great place, lovely. Also, the home of the Skull Merchant, whose non-made-up name is Adriana Imai. She's of Japanese heritage, but lives in Fortaleza, Brazil, which is in the northeastern section of the country, and is famous for having absolutely incredible beaches. It's also a rather large city with a whopping population of 2.7 million people, which would stress me out as an introvert, but something tells me Imai is doing just fine there. There are 3 European countries we haven't touched on yet, so let's knock those out now. First, we'll talk about France, which as far as countries go, France needs no introduction. This is a place with an ancient and rich heritage, one that has seen jubilant highs and crushing lows. Sadly, for Charlotte and Victor Deschays, the twins, they're pretty likely to remember their time in France as being something of a low point. Their mother was burned alive, Victor died, and Charlotte was hunted like an animal until being taken in by the entity. Like I said, something of a low point. While we know their chapter mate Elodie is Parisian, we have no idea where Charlotte and Victor are from, though we know they lived in a more rural part of the country during the 17th century. Even older than the twins is one Kovács Tarhos, now known as the Knight, who spent most of his life in Italy but was born and raised in Hungary. Like so many on this list, we don't know the exact town or city of origin and can only attribute the country as a whole. Of course, if you've followed this channel over the last year, you'll know that Hungary holds a very special place in my heart. From August to January, I was blessed with the opportunity to teach English in the capital city of Budapest, and let me tell you, there's just nowhere like it on earth. Hungary is certainly beautiful as a country, but let me tell you, it's even more beautiful as a nation. Hungarians are kind, intelligent, decent people, and even though their homeland has seen the very worst of humanity's evils, Hungarians remain stellar human beings. Sure, their sense of humor is dark as all hell, but yours would be too if you'd been through what they have. I genuinely love Hungary, and I'm tremendously happy that DBD added a Hungarian character. Magyarország köszönöm szépen. Szeretlek. Oh, and sorry for my terribly heavy American accent, I just can't get rid of that. Now, before I get all misty-eyed, let's move on to a pair of countries that I've never visited but would love to see one day, hopefully in more peaceful times, those being Russia and Ukraine. Now, I'm not smart, and this isn't a political channel, so we're not going to touch on anything that those 2 countries might bring to mind in the current moment. Instead, we're going to talk about a small girl named Anna who grew up to become the fearsome and capable Huntress. Per her lore, Anna lived in the Red Forest around the time of World War I, a time during which she killed both German and Russian soldiers. The Red Forest, as you likely know because you're a genius, is a real area in modern-day Ukraine. When Anna lived there, however, the area was still part of the Russian Empire, so it's hard to say whether she should be listed as Russian or a Ukrainian, but I'll lean towards the former, since that's very likely what she would have claimed had she known more about the world around her. One interesting note about Anna's home is that the developers specifically named the map the Red Forest, which this kind of contradicts the time frame they gave us. During World War I, the Red Forest wasn't actually called, well, the Red Forest. It only received that name after the Chernobyl disaster of 1986, which turned the trees in the surrounding forest a color that I'm kind of assuming you can figure out. Not much to do with this fact, I just thought it was an interesting, if totally innocent, continuity error. Moving on from Europe, we arrive in Africa. Now, we talked last video about how Resident Evil's Sheva is generally African with no specific country given, but the same thankfully can't be said for Philip Ojomo, the Wraith. Philip hails from Nigeria, a country well known for attractions like Garara Falls, the National Mosque of Abuja, and the bustling city of Lagos, and I'm sure I got all of those pronunciations spot on. As a self-professed vexillologist, flag nerd, I'd also like to add that while it's not my favorite African flag, Nigeria has one of the best flags on the continent, and that's saying something because Africa generally does really well when it comes to flags. Yes, it's a simple tricolor, but as far as tricolors go, it's a damn good one. As for Wraith, we don't know his city of origin, but we do know the general time frame of his upbringing. His grandmother describes Nigeria as being a newly formed country in the lore, so we can reason that Philip lived in the country sometime around the 1960s. When he migrated to the west is less clear, but at least we have something to go off of. We'll travel up to the Middle East now and look at one of DBD's oldest killers, that being the Plague, also known as Adiris. While we don't know the time frame for when Adiris lived, the Babylonian Empire wasn't exactly a flash in the pan, we do know that she was a Babylonian woman raised from a young age in the Temple of Purgation. Very little else is known about the Plague's upbringing beyond the politics within the temple, so for my headcanon, I just pretend that she and Hammurabi were besties and I leave it at that. Speaking of besties, it would have been cool if I could have made a transition out of that, but I'm not that smart, so we're talking about the trickster now. Ji Woon-hak was born in South Korea. While there's no explicit mention of his place of birth, we know that he lived in a dormitory in Seoul once Yoonjin started preparing the young boy for stardom. This in mind, it's not exactly a stretch to guess that Ji-woon might be from the capital city, but there's really no way of knowing for sure. After all, South Korea isn't an especially large country geographically speaking, so it's not at all out of the question that he relocated to Seoul once his father saw his potential. Still, Seoul is our best bet for the time being. Now, before we go, there's one more group of killers that needs to be discussed, and that's the group that doesn't belong to Earth as we know it. Unlike the survivors, some killers are just straight up alien, and you're never going to pinpoint their exact origins on a map. There are 4 of these in total, so let's do a rundown of each. The Demogorgon famously comes from the Upside Down, a parallel dimension that is in some way linked to Earth, but that also seems to be its own thing. Depending on the Demogorgon in question, the beast is either from the Upside Down equivalent of Hawkins, Indiana, or somewhere in the Kamchatka Peninsula. The model used for DBD is the same one Stranger Things used for the Gulag scenes, so it's possible we have a Russian Demogorgon on our hands. Of course, there's no way of knowing for sure, and despite using the same model, this could be an entirely different Demogorg from some other place entirely. We then have Pyramid Head, who DBD renamed to the Executioner. Rather than spawning from a real physical location, Pyramid Head is, to the best of my understanding, the manifestation of James Sunderland's guilt. So we can't really just say he's from Maine and call it a day. Whether you want to say Pyramid Head comes from James's brain, heart, soul, or something else entirely, the general takeaway is that Pyramid Head is a creature unique to Silent Hill and it has no real location of origin. After this, we have Nemesis, who is a test tube baby that was made in a lab in much the same way that Resident Evil 2's Mr. X was. I guess this would technically make Nemesis from the American Midwest, but like, where did they get the matter for the tyrant's body from? What about the chemicals to make the tentacle, the Nemesis, itself? Again, we're in a weird part of the video, so answers are going to be getting a tad vague, but I think it's most fair to just say that Nemi was cooked up in a lab and leave it at that. Finally, we have the Dredge, which can best be described as a malicious entity from a distant and unknowable realm. The Dredge is the physical manifestation of Mouth-Ink, and it's unclear how much free will the creature has. It could be serving some greater, more powerful boss, or it could be operating on its own free will, if it even has that. Obviously, it now takes orders from the entity, but before that, there's really no telling. But that's going to do it for my list. I do hope you enjoyed this series where we just kind of took a break from talking about the game so much and really just focused in on where the characters are from. I had fun doing these. I hope you had fun watching them. We will probably update it a little bit, maybe like a year from now or something. And hopefully when we do, we have more specific origins for different characters, especially people like Michaela, who we just don't know. But as always, I hope you had fun, and until the next video, I've been Das Food. Bye, friends.
I've been dreaming on in my head like I've seen it. A life worth living is a life with meaning. I'll do what I love till my heart stops beating. I'm feeding this demon. Got a taste, can't erase bitterness in my